His small hands were trembling as he grabbed the stranger's jacket. Tears carved rivers down his dirt-streaked face, his voice shattering with every desperate word. "Please, sir. They're beating my papa. He's going to die." The entire restaurant froze. Wine glasses stopped mid-pour. Every conversation died instantly. But the man this terrified child had chosen to beg wasn't just anyone. He was Park Kun, the most feared mafia boss in all of Seoul. And what he did next would shock everyone in that room. Stay with me until the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. It's a frigid December evening in Gangnam, Seoul, 2024. The Golden Phoenix restaurant hummed with the muted elegance of power brokers conducting million-dollar negotiations over aged whiskey and carefully measured words. This wasn't just any restaurant. This was Park Kun's kingdom. Every server knew to move like shadows and hear nothing. Every guest understood the sacred protocol. You respected the hierarchy. You honored the silence. And you absolutely never caused a disruption. Park Kun occupied his designated corner table, a man carved from ice and authority whose mere presence bent the room's gravity toward him. At 45, he had built a criminal empire that controlled half of Seoul's underworld. His dark eyes cataloged every detail. His commands were absolute. And tonight, like every Tuesday for the past 20 years, he was presiding over the weekly strategic meeting with his 6 lieutenants. The discussion moved in controlled, surgical tones. Financial reports were analyzed. Territorial expansions were calculated. Challenges were dissected with ruthless efficiency. This was Park Kun's method. Precise, emotionless, analytical to the point of inhumanity. He had outlasted countless rivals in this brutal world because he grasped one essential truth. Emotion was a liability. And liability was fatal. But then something occurred that would demolish the fortress Park Kun had constructed around his wounded soul. The restaurant's ornate entrance doors exploded inward with such violence they crashed against the walls. Every head snapped around. Discussions evaporated mid-syllable. The head server lunged forward, his expression drained of color. But before he could intercept the intrusion, every person in that room witnessed what had shattered their sanctuary. A young boy, barely 8 years old, swayed unsteadily in the entrance. His school uniform was shredded and filthy. Blood smeared across his small torn shirt. His dark hair stuck to his face in sweat-matted clumps around features twisted with terror and anguish. He looked like he'd fought through chaos itself to reach this place. The child's frantic gaze swept across the dining room desperately, hunting for something, someone, anyone capable of stopping a nightmare in progress. The restaurant's elite stared back in frozen disbelief. Some averted their eyes, disturbed by the violation of their evening. Others murmured amongst themselves, irritated that their business had been interrupted by what they presumed was some desperate street kid seeking charity. But this little boy wasn't seeking money. He was seeking a miracle. His wild eyes locked onto Park Kun's table, and something in that raw, innocent desperation recognized absolute power when it saw it. Perhaps it was how every other man in the room unconsciously deferred to him. Perhaps it was the custom-tailored suit or the traditional dragon tattoos visible at his collar that caught the chandelier light. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was something primal, a terrified child's survival instinct identifying the one person in that entire room who possessed the strength to actually change what was happening right now. The boy didn't hesitate. He ran straight toward Park Kun's table, weaving between shocked patrons who pulled back as if the child carried a contagion. His small sneakers slapped against the polished marble floor, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. Then Harris collided with the edge of Park Kun's table, his tiny fingers clutching desperately at the boss's immaculate suit jacket, leaving smudges of blood and dirt on the expensive fabric. "Please." The word exploded from Harris's throat, raw and broken. "The men with red dragon tattoos, they're killing my papa at the warehouse on Yongsan Street." He can't pay them back, but he tried, sir. He tried so hard. They're beating him right now and he's bleeding and the child's voice fractured into gasping sobs. Park Kwin's 6 lieutenants went rigid. Jae-sung's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Dong-hyun's eyes widened in disbelief. No one, absolutely no one, interrupted Park Kwin's Tuesday meetings. No one touched the boss without permission. And no one certainly had ever grabbed him like this desperate child was doing right now. But Park Kwin didn't move. His tattooed hand, which had been raised mid-gesture to emphasize a point about territorial strategy, froze in the air like a statue. For the first time in 20 years of ruthless leadership, Park Kwin hesitated. Harris continued through his tears, words tumbling out in frantic desperation. My papa is Charles Bond. He's just a teacher, sir. He teaches English to Korean students. He only borrowed money because Mama got cancer and we needed to pay the hospital, but she died anyway, and now the Red Dragons say he owes triple, and there, the boy's voice climbed higher, more desperate. Papa said if anything went wrong, I should find the man with dragons on his neck who owns the Golden Phoenix. He said only you have the power to stop them. Please, sir, please. The Red Dragon crew. Operating in his territory. Without permission. Without tribute. Preying on civilians like parasites. Park Kwin's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This was a territorial violation that demanded swift, brutal correction. But that wasn't what held him frozen. It was the boy's eyes. Dark, wet with tears, filled with a desperate courage that defied every survival instinct. Eyes that looked exactly like. The memory hit him like a bullet. 7 years ago. Different boy. Same age. Same desperate eyes. Begging for help that arrived 30 minutes too late. Minjun's eyes, still open, still afraid, staring at nothing in that abandoned building. Park Kwin's throat constricted. A hairline crack appeared in the ice that had encased his heart since the day he buried his son. He looked down at Harris, and for a moment, every person in that restaurant watched the impossible, Park Kwin's composure wavering. His cold mask slipping just enough to reveal something human underneath. Your father's name? Park Kwin's voice was quiet, controlled, but something in it had shifted. Charles Bond, sir. Harris's small hands still gripped Park Kwin's jacket, as if the fabric was the only thing keeping him from drowning. He's an English teacher. He borrowed money for my mama's cancer treatment, but she died, and now we can't. Harris's voice shattered completely. The child collapsed against Park Kwin's chair, his small body racked with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than fear. This was the sound of a boy watching his entire world disintegrate. Park Kwin stood abruptly. The movement was so sudden, so unprecedented, that several of his lieutenants actually flinched. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Park Kwin spoke 4 words that no one in that room had ever heard him say. The meeting is postponed. His lieutenants sat in stunned silence. In 20 years, nothing had ever interrupted Park Kwin's business. Until tonight. Park Kwin's voice cut through the restaurant's stunned silence like a blade. Jae-sung, bring the convoy. Dong-hyun, weapons. Everyone else, mobilize. Now. The command detonated into action. His lieutenants scrambled from their seats with a synchronized urgency none of them had displayed in years. Chairs scraped against marble. Phones emerged from pockets. Jae-sung was already sprinting toward the exit, barking orders into his mobile. Dong-hyun's hand disappeared beneath his jacket, checking his concealed weapon before rushing toward the back room where additional firepower was stored. Park Kwin snatched his black overcoat from the chair, his phone already pressed to his ear. I need eyes on the Yongsan Warehouse District. Red Dragon Operation. Find it. 3 minutes. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Mobilize the southern teams. I'm heading there personally. Harris stumbled after him, tears still streaming, but hope flickering in his desperate eyes. The child stayed close to Park Kwin's side like a shadow, terrified that if he lost sight of this powerful man, his father's last chance would vanish. Within 90 seconds, 4 black Mercedes sedans roared to life outside the Golden Phoenix. Park Kun guided Harris into the back seat of the lead vehicle, sliding in beside him. The convoy tore through Seoul's neon-lit streets, sirens wailing, traffic parting like water before a shark. Inside the car, Park Kun studied Harris's face in the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. The boy's features flickered between shadow and illumination, terror, hope, exhaustion, courage. All of it so painfully familiar. "Papa said you're scary but fair," Harris managed through diminishing sobs, his small voice trembling. "He said you'd understand because you protect people in Gangnam. He said if anyone could stop the Red Dragons, it's you." Park Kun's stone expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a microscopic softening around his eyes. Something human trying to surface through decades of carefully constructed armor. 7 years ago, Park Kun had a son, Minjun, 8 years old. The same dark eyes that caught light and held it. The same small hands that reached out when frightened. The same innocent courage that believed his father could fix anything. The Black Tigers had taken Minjun on a Tuesday evening. Retaliation for a territorial dispute Park Kun had resolved with characteristic brutality. They called with their ransom demands, their threats, their timeline. Park Kun mobilized everything, every resource, every contact, every weapon in his arsenal. But he was 30 minutes too late. He found Minjun in an abandoned building in Itaewon. His son's small body lay on cold concrete, blood pooled beneath him. Minjun's eyes were still open, still reflecting the fear he'd felt in his final moments. Still waiting for his father to save him. Park Kun's wife, Sujin, left him 3 months later. She couldn't look at him without seeing the husband who'd arrived too late. The man whose world of violence had murdered their only child. She vanished into grief and never returned. Park Kun buried his humanity with his son. He became the ice-cold boss Seoul feared, efficient, ruthless, without mercy or hesitation. Emotion was the weakness that had cost him everything. So he eliminated it. Until tonight. Until a desperate boy with Minjun's eyes grabbed his jacket and begged for a miracle. "Sir," Harris's small voice interrupted Park Kun's memories. "Why are you helping us?" "Papa said Mafia bosses don't help people for free." Park Kun was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold but carried an undercurrent of something raw and wounded. "Your father is right. But tonight, I'm not helping for free. Tonight, I'm paying a debt I owe to someone who isn't here anymore." Harris didn't understand. But in the dim light of the moving car, he saw something that shocked him more than anything else that terrible evening, tears threatening to break through Park Kun's carefully controlled expression. The convoy screeched into Yongsan Industrial District 8 minutes after leaving the restaurant. Park Kun stepped out of the car and the air itself seemed to freeze. Because everyone in Seoul's underworld knew one thing: when Park Kun arrived personally, someone was about to pay a terrible price. The warehouse loomed before them like a monument to urban decay. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth. Rusted metal siding hung in corroded sheets. Shadows pooled in every corner, thick and impenetrable. This was the kind of place where screams went unheard and bodies disappeared without questions. The 4 black Mercedes positioned themselves in a tactical perimeter around the building. Doors opened in synchronized silence. Park Kun's men emerged like wraiths, weapons drawn, moving into strategic positions with practiced efficiency. They'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Harris lunged for the warehouse door the moment the car stopped. "Papa." Jae-sung caught the boy gently but firmly, pulling him back. "Wait here." "But my papa." Park Kun placed one hand on Harris's shoulder. His voice was quiet but absolute. "Stay in the car. I'll bring your father back." It wasn't a request. It was a promise carved in stone. Park Kun walked toward the warehouse entrance alone, hands sliding casually into his pockets. His footsteps were measured, unhurried, as if he were strolling into a business meeting rather than a potential massacre. The heavy steel door stood ajar. He pushed it open with one foot and stepped inside. The interior reeked of rust, oil, and blood. In the center of the vast concrete space, Charles Bond lay crumpled on the floor like a discarded puppet. His face was a canvas of purple bruises and split skin. Blood leaked from his nose and mouth. His breathing came in shallow, agonized gasps. Barely conscious. Barely alive. 4 men surrounded him. Red dragon tattoos marked their arms, cheap, crude ink that announced their affiliation like a warning label. The leader stood directly over Charles, Kim Tae-won, a scarred man whose cruel smile had been earned through years of predatory violence. Tae-won drove his boot into Charles's ribs. The sickening crack echoed through the warehouse. "You should have paid, English teacher. Now you'll learn what happens to people who borrow from us." The overhead fluorescent lights died instantly. Darkness swallowed the warehouse whole. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that transformed the space into something hellish. When the crimson illumination stabilized, Park Kwon stood in the center of the room, 10 feet from Tae-won. He hadn't been there before. The 4 enforcers jumped, hands flying toward concealed weapons. But Park Kwon hadn't moved. His hands remained buried in his pockets. His expression was perfectly calm, as if he'd materialized through sheer force of will. Tae-won's eyes widened. Recognition hit him like ice water. The color drained from his scarred face. "P. Park Kwon SSI, we didn't know this man was under your protection." Silence. Park Kwon's voice was quieter than a whisper, but sharper than any blade. Each word sliced through the air with surgical precision. "You operate in my territory. You prey on civilians. You beat a father while his son runs terrified through the streets, begging strangers for mercy." He took 1 step forward. His footfall echoed like a death knell in the cavernous space. Then another step. The enforcers backed away instinctively, even though they outnumbered him 4 to 1. "I should end all of you right here." Park Kwon's eyes were darker than the shadows surrounding them. "Your bodies would never be found. Your families would search forever. And no one, not one person in this entire city, would ask me a single question." Tae-won laughed nervously, the sound brittle and desperate. He was trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped completely through his fingers. "Park Kwon SSI, this is just business. The foreigner owed us money." Park Kwon's hand moved so fast, Tae-won didn't even see it coming. Park Kwon's hand closed around Tae-won's throat with devastating precision. He lifted the scarred man off the ground with one arm, holding him suspended in the air like a broken marionette. Tae-won's feet kicked uselessly, his hands clawing at Park Kwon's iron grip. There was no shouting, no rage. Just cold, calculated dominance that was somehow more terrifying than any display of emotion could have been. Silence. Park Kwon's voice remained perfectly level. "You will speak only when I ask you questions. Do you understand?" Tae-won managed a strangled nod. Park Kwon released him. The enforcer collapsed onto the concrete, gasping and coughing, his face purple from oxygen deprivation. Park Kwon turned away from him as if he'd already ceased to matter. He crouched beside Charles Bond, 2 fingers pressing against the teacher's neck, checking for a pulse. Still there. Weak, irregular, but alive. Fading, but not gone yet. He removed his expensive jacket, the same one Harris had grabbed with desperate, bloody hands, and carefully positioned it under Charles's head. Then he stood and turned back to the enforcers. "How much does he owe?" Tae-won struggled to his feet, rubbing his bruised throat. "15 million won, plus accumulated interest." "How much did he borrow originally?" 5 million won, but... Park Kwon's eyes narrowed into slits of ice. "You tripled his debt with predatory interest. How many others have you trapped this way?" Tae-won's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. "Answer me." We target foreigners, the ones without connections," Tae-won tried to justify, his voice hoarse. They don't know the system. They can't go to the police. They're vulnerable. Park Kun stood slowly, and every enforcer in that warehouse took an involuntary step backward. You target the vulnerable, the desperate, the ones who can't fight back. He began walking in a slow circle around them, a predator evaluating prey. The Red Dragons have entrapped over 200 people in Gangnam alone. I know this because I know everything that happens in my territory. You deliberately hunt foreigners because they have no family connections, no understanding of Korean law enforcement, no recourse. Park Kun stopped in front of Taewon. Charles Bond, a widowed English teacher who borrowed 5 million won for his Korean wife's cancer treatment. She died anyway. And you tripled his debt, knowing he could never pay. Knowing you could bleed him forever. The warehouse was silent except for Charles's labored breathing and the distant hum of Seoul traffic. Here's what happens now. Park Kun's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. You will pay for this man's medical treatment, everyone. You will forgive his debt completely and return triple everything he has paid you. You will bring me the records of every person you've entrapped. Every name, every amount, every detail. Taewon's eyes widened in horror. That's hundreds of people. We can't possibly. Every single one. Park Kun leaned closer. You have two choices. Restructure your operation under my supervision as a legitimate lending business with fair terms and legal interest rates, or I dismantle you piece by piece. Your families, your operations, your bank accounts, your safe houses, your lives, all gone. Erased as if you never existed. He straightened. You have 5 seconds to decide. Taewon opened his mouth to protest. Before he could speak, the steel doors burst open with explosive force. Park Kun's men poured through the entrance like a tactical strike force, 20 armed operatives moving with military precision. They spread throughout the warehouse in controlled chaos, weapons trained on every Red Dragon enforcer. Within 90 seconds, Taewon and his men were disarmed, forced to their knees, hands behind their heads. They begged for mercy they'd never shown their victims. Their voices echoed off the concrete walls, desperate pleas falling on ears that had heard too many desperate pleas before. But Park Kun wasn't listening. He was already kneeling beside Charles Bond again, checking his injuries with surprising gentleness. Within minutes, the Red Dragon enforcers were completely subdued, on their knees, begging for mercy they'd never shown their victims. But Park Kun wasn't done. Because what he did next proved he was more than just a mafia boss seeking revenge. Park Kun bent down and lifted Charles Bond onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The unconscious teacher's weight settled across Park Kun's back, blood, sweat, and broken humanity pressing against expensive fabric that would never be clean again. Charles murmured incoherently, words dissolving into pained gasps. His swollen face lolled against Park Kun's shoulder, leaving dark stains on the white shirt beneath the boss's suit. The Red Dragon enforcers watched from their knees in stunned disbelief. Mafia bosses didn't carry victims themselves. They gave orders. They stayed clean. They maintained the distance that separated power from weakness. But Park Kun walked past them without a single glance, Charles Bond's blood seeping into his clothes with every step. His footfalls echoed through the warehouse like a funeral march, steady, purposeful, unbreakable. Outside, the December air bit with cold precision. Harris saw Park Kun emerge through the steel doors carrying his father's limp body. The boy's face transformed from desperate fear into explosive hope. He broke free from Jae-sung's restraining hand and sprinted forward. Papa, please wake up. Park Kun moved to the open Mercedes door and carefully, almost tenderly, lowered Charles onto the back seat. Harris scrambled in immediately, grabbing his father's bloodied hand, pressing it against his tear-soaked face. Papa, I found help. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. The words tumbled out between sobs, a prayer, a promise, a desperate attempt to will his father back to consciousness. The convoy tore through Seoul's glittering streets, sirens wailing like wounded animals. Traffic parted before them. Red lights became irrelevant. Nothing mattered except the unconscious man bleeding in the back seat and the terrified child holding his hand. Park Kwon's phone was already pressed to his ear. Seoul Private Medical Center. Trauma team to the entrance in 15 minutes. Best surgeon you have. Prepare for severe internal injuries, possible broken ribs, significant blood loss. He paused. I don't care what it costs. Have everything ready. Harris wouldn't stop talking, his voice high and fragile. Is Papa going to die? Please, sir, don't let him die. He's all I have left. Please. Park Kwon looked at the boy, and something in his stone expression softened. Microscopic, barely visible, but there. Your father is strong. He survived this long because he had something to live for you. The convoy screeched to a halt outside Seoul Private Medical Center 12 minutes later. The trauma team stood ready at the entrance, a small army of medical professionals in pristine scrubs. They swarmed the Mercedes the moment the door opened, transferring Charles onto a gurney with practiced efficiency. Severe blunt force trauma, possible internal bleeding, decreased consciousness. The lead physician rattled off observations as they rushed Charles through the automatic doors. Harris tried to follow but stumbled. Park Kwon caught the boy's shoulder, steadying him, then walked beside him through the hospital corridors. Staff and patients alike parted before them, some recognizing Park Kwon's face, others simply sensing power and danger radiating from him like heat. A hospital administrator materialized, clipboard in hand, expression professionally apologetic. Sir, regarding payment and insurance. Park Kwon's eyes cut toward him. The administrator's words died in his throat. Send the bill to me. All of it. Park Kwon's voice allowed no discussion. If you waste another second talking about money instead of saving that man's life, you'll regret it. The administrator vanished. They reached the surgical wing. Charles disappeared through doors marked authorized personnel only. Harris stood frozen in the hallway, small and lost, watching his father vanish from sight. Park Kwon guided him to the waiting room, sterile white walls, uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everything look corpse pale. He sat down, still covered in Charles's blood. Harris sat beside him, small hands clutching his school uniform. Other patients and their families stared but kept their distance. Park Kwon's presence created an invisible perimeter that no one dared cross. Hours crawled past in suffocating silence. Finally, Harris spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did you help us? Park Kwon stared at his tattooed hands, hands that had killed, destroyed, commanded empires built on fear and violence. Hands that had failed to save what mattered most. The pause stretched long enough that Harris thought he wouldn't answer. Park Kwon looked at this brave, terrified child and saw the ghost of his own son staring back at him. And for the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to speak the truth. I once had a son your age. I lost him because I was too late. Today, I was not too late. 3 hours crawled by, the longest hours of Harris's young life. Every minute stretched into an eternity of uncertainty. Every sound from the surgical wing made him jump, hoping for news. Park Kwon didn't leave. Didn't make calls. Didn't check the messages that kept lighting up his phone. He simply sat beside the boy in that sterile waiting room, a silent presence that somehow made the terror more bearable. Jae-sung arrived with food, rice, soup, something warm. Harris stared at it, but couldn't bring himself to eat. His stomach was twisted into knots too tight to accommodate anything but fear. Park Kwon's phone vibrated constantly. Text after text. Updates about the Red Dragon situation, territorial matters requiring decisions, business that couldn't wait. He ignored every single one. Harris's voice was small when he finally broke the silence. Your son, what was his name? Park Kwon's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, quietly, Min-jun. What happened to him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Park Kun stared at the opposite wall, seeing something that existed only in memory. 7 years ago, the Black Tigers, a rival organization, kidnapped him. They wanted leverage against me. Wanted to force me to abandon territory I'd taken from them. His voice was flat, emotionless, but something beneath it trembled. I received the ransom call. I mobilized everything. Every man, every resource, every weapon at my disposal. Harris watched him, seeing pain crack through the ice. But I was 30 minutes too late. By the time I found the building where they'd taken him, Minjun was already gone. Park Kun's hands clenched into fists. He was 8 years old. The same age as you. He had your eyes, dark, trusting, still believing his father could protect him from anything. I found him on the floor of an abandoned building. His eyes were still open. Still afraid. Park Kun's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He died waiting for me to save him. Harris's small hand reached out and touched Park Kun's arm. My wife blamed me. She was right to. I brought that violence into our lives. I created the enemies who took our son. Park Kun stared at his tattooed hands. She left 3 months later. I never saw her again. And I buried my humanity with Minjun. I vowed never to feel anything again. Because feeling meant pain. And I'd had enough pain to last 10 lifetimes. The waiting room was silent except for the distant beeping of hospital monitors and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. I'm sorry you lost your son, sir. Harris's voice cracked with sincerity. But he would be proud that you saved my papa. The simple, innocent wisdom hit Park Kun like a physical blow. His eyes began to water, the first tears in 7 years threatening to break through walls built from grief and guilt. Your father will survive, Park Kun said, his voice rough. And you will never worry about money again. As if summoned by those words, the surgical doors opened. Dr. Kim emerged, still in blood-spattered scrubs, pulling off his surgical mask. His expression was tired but relieved. The surgery was successful. Dr. Kim's words made Harris gasp. Mr. Bond has 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding that we've stopped, and a severe concussion. But he'll make a full recovery in 6 to 8 weeks. Harris collapsed forward, sobbing with relief so intense it shook his entire small body. Park Kun stood, his presence suddenly commanding the space. When can he go home? 2 weeks in the hospital for observation and initial healing, then extended home rest with follow-up care. He'll stay here until fully healed. Private room. Best care available. Send all bills directly to me. Park Kun's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. Dr. Kim nodded and departed. Park Kun did something then that would have shocked anyone in Seoul's underworld who witnessed it. He knelt down to Harris's level, a gesture of equality no Mafia boss would ever make. He took the boy's small, trembling hands in his own scarred, tattooed ones. Your father is a good man who was trapped by bad people. That won't happen again. You have my protection now. Do you understand what that means? Harris nodded, not fully understanding but overwhelmingly grateful. It means no one touches your family again. Ever. As Harris finally fell asleep in the waiting room chair, exhaustion claiming him, Park Kun made a phone call that would change everything. Jae-sung, bring me every record the Red Dragons had. I want names, amounts, addresses. We're going to fix this, all of it. The next morning, Jae-sung arrived at Park Kun's office with 3 boxes of documents. He set them on the mahogany desk with a heavy thud that echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. Park Kun opened the first box and began reading. Names. Addresses. Loan amounts. Interest rates that bordered on mathematical sadism. The Red Dragon's entire predatory operation laid bare in meticulous, damning detail. 237 victims. Mostly foreign workers and immigrants, English teachers, factory workers, restaurant staff. People far from home with no family connections to protect them. Debts ranging from 2 million won to 50 million. Total amount extracted over the past 3 years, 8 billion won. $6 million built on the desperation of people who had nowhere else to turn. Park Kun closed the file and picked up his phone. Conference room. 1 hour. All financial advisors and lieutenants. Non-negotiable. 60 minutes later, his inner circle sat around the table, confused about the emergency meeting. Park Kun stood at the head, the 3 boxes stacked beside him like evidence at a trial. We're forgiving every debt the Red Dragons collected. And we're returning all payments with 50% interest. The room erupted. His financial advisor stood abruptly. Boss, this will cost us. This will cost the Red Dragons everything. Park Kun's voice cut through the protests like a blade. Their assets, their properties, their operations, their cars, their investments, all of it gets liquidated to pay restitution. Everyone they extracted through predatory lending goes back to the people they victimized. His lieutenants exchanged glances. This wasn't how their world worked. You didn't give money back. You took it and held it. Anyone who has a problem with this decision can leave now. Park Kun's eyes swept the room. No one moved. 3 days later, Taewon and the remaining Red Dragon enforcers were brought before Park Kun in chains. They knelt in his office, the same men who'd kicked Charles Bond nearly to death now reduced to begging for their lives. You have 2 choices, Park Kun said, walking slowly around them. Prison, where your crimes will be thoroughly documented and your sentences will be long. Or indentured servitude, you work off every debt you collected, transformed into legitimate financial services under my direct supervision. Taewon looked up confused. You want us to work for you? I want you to repay what you stole. With fair interest rates, transparent terms, and actual business ethics. Park Kun stopped in front of him. You'll learn what legitimate lending looks like. And if you ever prey on the vulnerable again, prison will seem merciful compared to what I'll do. They chose servitude. Word spread through Seoul's underworld like wildfire. Park Kun had gone soft. The feared Mafia boss was forgiving debts, helping foreigners, personally overseeing a rehabilitation program for loan sharks. Some whispered he'd lost his edge. Others wondered if he'd become even more dangerous, a man operating by principles more terrifying than simple greed. Meanwhile, at Seoul Private Medical Center, Charles Bond slowly returned to consciousness. 2 weeks of surgeries and recovery brought clarity back to his swollen eyes. Harris was there every afternoon after school, doing homework at his father's bedside, talking about teachers and classmates and the man with dragon tattoos who'd saved them both. Park Kun visited daily, an unusual gesture for someone of his status. He'd arrive in the evening, sit in the chair beside Charles's bed, and ask about his recovery with genuine concern that surprised even himself. When Charles was finally lucid enough to understand what had happened, he tried to thank Park Kun. The words came out broken, inadequate. Your son saved both our lives, Park Kun said quietly. You raised a brave boy. Park Kun's team began contacting all 237 victims. Phone calls, personal visits, official letters. Your debt is forgiven. All payments are being returned with 50% interest. You're free. Many cried with relief, years of crushing pressure lifted in a single moment. Some didn't believe it was real, thought it was a trap, another predatory scheme. Park Kun personally met with those families, looked them in the eye, and assured them they were safe. His reputation began to shift. Still feared. Still dangerous. But now respected in a way that transcended simple terror. He'd become something Seoul's underworld had rarely seen, a criminal with a conscience. Charles Bond was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks after that terrible night. But he wasn't going home to his cramped, debt-ridden apartment. Park Kun had one more surprise that would prove this wasn't just about revenge or justice, it was about redemption. Park Kun drove them himself. Charles sat in the passenger seat, still moving stiffly from healing ribs. Harris pressed his face against the back window, watching Seoul's streets blur past with the wonder of a child who'd almost lost everything and gained it back. They pulled up to a modern apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. Clean streets. Good schools nearby. Safe. Park Kuan led them to the third floor and opened the door to Unit 304. Charles stepped inside and froze. 2 bedrooms. Fully furnished with tasteful, comfortable furniture. Kitchen stocked with essentials. Sunlight streaming through clean windows. A home, not just shelter. I can't accept this, Charles began. You're not accepting charity. Park Kuan's voice was firm. Your son saved my life. This is payment for a debt I owe. The rent is paid for 5 years. Argue with me about it, and I'll make it 10. Charles's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. There's something else. Park Kuan handed him an envelope. Seoul International Academy. Teaching position. Better salary, full benefits, respectable institution. Your debts are cleared. Your credit is restored. Harris has a full scholarship to the same school. Charles opened the envelope with shaking hands. An employment contract. Official school letterhead. Everything legitimate, everything real. I don't know how to thank you. Raise your son well. That's thanks enough. That first dinner was awkward. A mafia boss sitting at a family dinner table felt wrong in ways none of them could articulate. Charles cooked a traditional English meal, shepherd's pie, the only thing he remembered his own mother making, his hands nervous on the utensils. Harris chattered excitedly, oblivious to the strangeness. He talked about his new school, the art supplies in his room, the kids he'd met in the building. His joy was infectious. Park Kuan found himself smiling. Not the cold, calculated expression his enemies knew. Something genuine. Something he'd forgotten existed. Weeks became months. Park Kuan visited every Sunday without fail. It became routine. Harris would show him homework and drawings, Charles would cook, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Park Kuan taught Harris Korean history, taught him chess, told him stories about Korean culture that had nothing to do with violence or power. Slowly, impossibly, the feared mafia boss learned to be human again. Spring arrived in Seoul 6 months later, cherry blossoms transforming the city into something beautiful. Harris's 9th birthday fell on a Sunday. Park Kuan arrived with an elaborate gift, a complete professional art set, because Harris loved drawing more than anything. There was cake. There was laughter. There was a normal family moment that none of them had expected to have. Charles watched Park Kuan help Harris open the art set, saw the way the boss's hardened features softened when the boy hugged him in excitement. He watched 7 years of grief slowly lifting like fog burning away under sunlight. After dinner, Harris hugged Park Kuan goodbye at the door. The boy stretched up on his toes and whispered, "You're like my second papa now." Park Kuan froze. Emotions he'd buried with Minjun came flooding back through the cracks in walls he'd thought were impenetrable. He looked at Charles, who stood in the doorway with tears in his eyes, nodding with gratitude and understanding. Park Kuan knelt slowly, bringing himself to Harris's eye level. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion he'd sworn never to feel again. "And you are like the son I thought I'd lost forever." He embraced Harris, the first time he'd hugged anyone since holding Minjun's lifeless body 7 years ago. Charles placed his hand on Park Kuan's shoulder in silent acknowledgement. 3 people, each broken by loss, forming an unexpected family from the wreckage of their pain. Park Kuan remained Seoul's most powerful mafia boss. His enemies still feared him. His territory still expanded. But every Sunday, without fail, he left that world behind. He became the grandfather figure Harris needed, the brother Charles never had, and the father Park Kuan thought he could never be again. The Red Dragon operation was completely dismantled. All 237 victims rebuilt their lives. And Park Kuan's reputation changed forever. They said he'd gone soft. But those who really knew understood the truth. He hadn't become weak, he'd become whole. 1 year later, Harris's school held an art exhibition. Park Kuan arrived in an expensive suit, his presence drawing stares from other parents. But he didn't care. He found Harris's painting on display, My Family, showing 3 people, Charles, Harris, and a man with dragon tattoos on his neck. Park Kun stared at it, and tears finally flowed freely down his scarred face. Charles and Harris joined him, the three standing together before the painting. "I was Seoul's most feared mafia boss," Park Kun said quietly. "But this boy taught me something I'd forgotten, that the most dangerous thing in this world isn't power or fear. It's love. Because love makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability takes the kind of courage I'd lost years ago. So the next time someone tells you that people can't change, that cold hearts can't thaw, that monsters stay monsters, remember this story. Remember Harris, the brave boy who ran to a mafia boss crying. And remember Park Kun, who learned that saving one family could save his own soul." Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. Until next time, stay blessed.